Here we go. All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Elizabeth Hansberg. I'm the director and co-founder of People for Housing Orange County. And I'm really honored today to have with us two fine scholars from the University of California at Irvine, Professor Alejandra Reyes and Dean Jon Gould, who are going to talk with us today about the results of a poll that was done last year by UCI in collaboration with United Way. And this was a great piece of feedback for people in my world, because it shows that there is indeed public support to tackle the issue of the housing shortage and the affordability crisis. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Dean Gould to share the first part about the results of the poll. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen.
And if you
Dean,
could allow me to share mine, we can.
Indeed. Yes, this does seem to be a challenging thing for me.
Let's wait until we see how challenging it is for me.
Okay, post-pandemic, I still am playing on the learning curve.
All right, thank you. That should do it. And then we'll wait for lightness to come in. Here we are. So thanks for the opportunity to talk a little bit about the poll. First, about what the poll was and why would we do something like this. So for any of you who've lived in Orange County for, say, 30 years or more, you may remember that back in the 1990s, my school, the School of Social Ecology at the University of California, Irvine, had a poll that regularly went into the county to address big ticket questions that matter to residents. That poll went away for a while. We restarted it in 2023. And the way we're doing the poll is we are working in tandem with community organizations to address big questions that matter to county residents. The notion here is, as Orange County's research institution, we're in a unique position to be able to help people understand what residents think about big issues here that matter to their lives, what solutions they've considered to these problems, what messages might help move them in one way or another, and what kinds of options are really just no-go areas. We were fortunate to begin this poll last year in partnership with the United Way and its United to End Homelessness campaign. And the topic that we picked to begin this was homelessness and affordable housing. Now, why would we pick those? I think talking to anyone in Orange County, we hear that those issues are very important to people. And indeed, when we did the poll, we asked people to name serious problems that are affecting their lives in Orange County. So if you look at the yellow, this is just a generic name questions that matter to you. You'll see that homelessness and affordable housing were cited most often by residents, 71 and 69% of the time. It goes down to traffic, taxes, and crime. As we go further, we then asked people to pick the most serious problem from that same list. And not surprisingly, affordable housing and homelessness were the top two issues. Affordable housing first, homelessness second. And then look at that huge drop off in what issues are most problematic to people: crime, taxes, lack of jobs.
Dean Gould, could you advance your slides? I don't think the audience is seeing.
Really? Because
Can you just click on like slide 3 or 4?
So this is interesting. On my screen, I'm seeing slide 2 right here.
Someone from our audience says that you may have 2 screens, and perhaps the screen that's displaying is not the correct one.
Oh, okay. Interesting. Let's try this again then.
Now we see slide 2.
You see this here?
Yeah, with the blue background. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, I apologize, folks. All that you were seeing before was probably my main screen. So let's go back here. We were in partnership with United Way and United to End Homelessness. We picked homelessness and affordable housing. Okay, here we go. So homelessness, affordable housing, top two issues, 71%, 69%. When we ask people to pick only the most serious problem, you'll see affordable housing and homelessness dwarf anything else. Going down here, I know this is difficult for people to potentially read, but I'll help folks understand this. When we look at what's the most important issue or most serious issue, homelessness and affordable housing, it varies a little bit depending on the supervisor district. So if you're central and north in the county, you're more likely to pick homelessness over affordable housing. As we move to further down in the county, the 3rd and the 5th districts, it'll be affordable housing that gets picked. But central on up in the county, affordable housing is the #1 issue over homelessness. So these are the issues that matter the most to Orange County residents in terms of an issue that needs to be addressed. Moreover, Orange County residents are familiar with the issue of homelessness. So the top set of numbers asks the question whether people know someone who is or has been homeless. A majority know someone who is or has been homeless. Now let that sink in for a moment. Over half of our residents in Orange County know someone who is homeless or has been homeless. The next ones are not as surprising. The next one is not as surprising that 85% of residents have seen someone experiencing homelessness at least weekly. One needs only to go out for a drive in Orange County to know that this is true. The next one down is slightly under half of Orange County residents interact with a person who is experiencing homelessness at least weekly. So people see homelessness, they interact with people who are homeless, and a majority, in fact, know someone who is homeless or has been homeless. This isn't just a vague problem that sits out there as addressing someone else. Over half, just about half, I should say, of renters in Orange County are worried about being able to pay their rent or the threat of eviction. Now, it's not as big a problem among people or homeowners, but still, 1 in 5 homeowners in Orange County says that they've been worried about the ability to pay their mortgage, and they are worried about their risk of foreclosure. So 1 in 5 homeowners in this county say that. Half of renters in Orange County say that they are concerned about their ability to pay their rent, and they are worried about the threat of eviction. We then said to people, all right, this is a problem. You've said it's a big problem. You experience it, you experience homeless, or you have some experience with homelessness, and you are worried about your own threat of homelessness. Who do you say should be responsible for addressing the problem of homelessness? Well, the vast majority of people, 2/3, say that it's the Board of Supervisors and city councils that should be addressing this. Lesser numbers talk about advocacy groups, religious organizations, and large companies. When we ask people to pick the responsible body to deal with this, it was by far the Board of Supervisors in the county, and then also city councils. So people are looking largely to government to address the problem of homelessness. Moreover, Orange County residents are willing to commit resources to address homelessness. So we asked people a series of questions about bond issues that they might consider spending tax dollars on to address particular problems. One of the most popular, that is one of the 2 top ones that people were willing to spend tax dollars on to have a bond issue to address a problem, was homelessness. So 85% of residents in our poll said that they would support a bond issue to deal with homelessness. And this was widely across the county, top to bottom, left to right. This number came in higher than almost everything else. I think the only thing that was higher was building new infrastructure. You'll see on the far right side that lesser numbers were supporting hiring more social workers. Actually, it was K through 12 education came in a point higher than homelessness, but lesser numbers to hire police officers and also carbon offsets. So people were willing to spend tax dollars on this. We then asked people, what other things are you willing to consider to deal with homelessness and the lack of affordable housing? And what's really interesting here is there was broad support for a number of different kinds of approaches. And this was support across multiple categories, top to bottom. And when I say top to bottom in the county, I'm talking about first district to third and fifth districts, left to right, Democrat, Republican, young to old. So people were willing, they were supportive of increasing mental health services. They were supportive of building more shelters. They were supportive of building more long-term housing, hiring more social workers. They were supportive of a number of things, including lowering property taxes to prevent homelessness. There were very few things that people were not supportive of. So they were largely not supportive of giving cash payments to the homeless. They were also on the fence about whether they think it's effective for the police to enforce vagrancy laws. And they were also not supportive of using the police to essentially clear homeless encampments. This was on the fence. The one thing that's not up here is they very strongly were opposed to simply moving the homeless out of Orange County to other jurisdictions. So really only two things have strong opposition: direct cash payments to the homeless, and essentially saying it's someone else's problem. We are not going to deal with that problem here in Orange County. We'll just send the homeless elsewhere. There was some split here on whether the formerly homeless should be in apartments in respondents' neighborhoods. We know this is the NIMBY phenomenon, not my backyard. So people are broadly supportive of a number of responses. They are a little bit on the fence about whether they are willing to have the homeless in their, or I should say the formerly homeless, in their neighborhoods. So the question is, where do we go from here? There is absolute agreement in the county that homelessness and affordable housing are big social problems that need to be addressed. There is broad recognition that the county board and the city's councils are the ones that residents are looking to try to address the problem. There is also broad agreement on a number of different strategies for dealing with homelessness, from a bond issue to a number of other measures of how to respond to homelessness. This is on people's minds. It is a top issue. They want to see something done, and they're looking largely to the county board and to city councils. This is something that is timely, that is important, and that people want to see addressed. So with that, I will leave you with this complicated website if you want to go read the report, but really all you need to do is put into Google UCI homelessness poll, and it will take you right to our website. So with that, I am going to end my part here. I am going to stop sharing and look forward to hearing from my colleague, Professor Reyes, and then also to engage with the audience.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Dean Gould. We really appreciate your time and laying out the results of the poll for us. I agree. I couldn't agree more that this is a timely topic, because we know that right now people that are running for city council are having conversations with those in their network about getting support to run, looking at the issues, trying to identify what are going to be the issues that they're going to put forward as part of their talking points and platform. And so getting the word out that voters in Orange County feel a sense of that they can call on their city council members to address this issue in conjunction with the Board of Supervisors makes this topic. This is why I wanted to do this right now, was I really want to get the message out to folks that are thinking about running for office to educate yourself on this topic. And we know that an adequate supply of housing ends homelessness. And so, building more affordable housing, working to keep residents housed. There's been a shift just even in the last year to eviction diversion as a strategy to keep people from falling into homelessness, using whatever it takes dollars. So again, really appreciate your time, and I'm going to turn it over to Professor Alejandra Reyes to talk to us around strategies that cities have been engaging in. So I'll stop sharing. Professor Alejandra, please go ahead and share.
Of course. Just a second. And wanting to make sure that seeing my, you're seeing the presentation mode, aren't you?
Yes,
Or, yeah. And I always forget how you change this. Anyone remembers?
I think on mine, you
Hide
just click.
presenter view. Is is it good now?
It's good.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for organizing this, Elizabeth. I'm really glad to be sharing the floor with our Dean of Social Ecology in this important issue and at this important moment. So what I'll be sharing a little bit, it's sort of like the contrast that we have been experiencing in Orange County for a while. So on the one hand, we know there's a lot of contention in response to state level laws and reforms to affordable housing production, in particular that has been a constant in many of our cities, unfortunately. But there's some important shifts going on, right? Some of them are being um, driven by top-down action, and others, I would argue, are very much driven as well from the bottom up through grassroots organizing and some both advocates, activists, and local governments leveraging some state level policies to even shift policy directions and implement some stronger renter protections, for instance. And so I'll just give a little bit of context on what has driven my interest on this research. So on the one hand, perhaps many of us have heard about and Dean Gould just shared how both county government but also local governments are being seen as mainly responsible for addressing housing issues, right? And so the topic of local control, I think, has been in the minds of many throughout the last housing cycle here in California, with the argument that taking away local control around zoning, for instance, can be anti-democratic because local governments are closer to the people. However, what I'm really interested in sort of teasing out, it's whether really local governments have served their all of their constituents and all of the region in an adequate way in topics such as housing, right? And how different levels of government then have to sometimes intervene to be able to tackle some societal issues. So we can think about the tension between housing needs being sort of like a societal issue and then localized private interest like exclusion being something that's really not in the public good. Um, right now, we're, I think, in a particularly interesting moment in California because of a series of reforms that have been passing since 2017 that have given a lot more teeth to state level laws that in the past really had very limited enforcement and that caused a lot of disparities in terms of housing development across the state, really, but Southern California, it's a really, I think, notable case to look at that. Without going into too much detail, I'll show you a couple of maps and a little bit of my spatial analysis to show why Orange County can be such an illuminating case in understanding the issues with sort of like the characteristic segregated diversity of metropolitan regions in California and elsewhere, right? Um, However, qualitative analysis and content analysis of several news sources, many local and regional housing meetings and government documents has been the center of my research. And through coding and content analysis, I'll just briefly mention that there were various really interesting, to me at least, themes that came up. But two that I'm particularly interested in sharing with you today are state-local conflict, but also local policy shifts, right? And so even though the conflict can be sort of really disparaging sometimes to witness, and I felt it over the last few years, I think it's also hopeful to see that there's some slow perhaps, but some change going on. And so just to provide a little bit of context, which of course many of you are familiar with, we do have very pressing unaffordability in Orange County, even surpassing that of the LA greater region. We also have really important levels of segregation. And so this acronym refers to racially concentrated areas of affluence, which we see in blue. And this is a term that was coined by a scholar in 2019, but then it was adopted by California's government to try to further fair housing goals. And so these places that have a really significant overrepresentation of non-Hispanic white households and upper income households are seeing a sort of an issue, because as we can see, it's not only neighborhoods, but it's entire cities in our case, especially if we look at Southern OC, which have had a history of very exclusionary zoning and development. And so, I mean, I'm guessing that most of our audience here is very familiar with Orange County, but just to provide a little bit of additional context in terms of what are some of the real estate quote unquote innovations that have originated in OC. Things like HOAs originated in Huntington Beach, gated communities, retirement communities that unfortunately have been very exclusionary as well, did originate here. And so these forms of private governance, right, also take us back to the question of local control and whether that local control is really democratic. So I'll try to just jump ahead to make sure that I do get to the meat and bones of my research here, providing a little bit of the same diversity, heterogeneity, but also very much segregated nature of our county. We can see here how Northern OC it's much denser than Southern OC, how the median incomes are much lower in North OC, rents much higher in Southern OC. And we also importantly have to acknowledge that there's a few cities like especially Anaheim, Garden Grove, and Santana that have really been carrying the brunt of low-income housing production, not only by allowing more housing development over the recent housing cycles, but also by managing subsidy programs in a way that other cities in OC do not, right? And an important thing for us to think about, and why the contention has been so important in the last couple of years in Orange County, it's because historically we were assigned very low RHNA numbers. And so here we see a lot of numbers, but the only thing that I do want to emphasize is that, right, in the past, through different mechanisms, and I'll share how vacancy rates in coastal cities like Newport Beach and Laguna Beach allowed cities to justify their sometimes and very often single-digit housing allocations over 8 years, right? Whereas SCAG, the Southern California Association of Governments, was pushing a lot of the housing growth towards the Inland Empire. And so here's the map that I wanted to quickly show to also tease our continuous argument about housing production and add a little bit of nuance, right? Market production of multi-million-dollar homes in Newport Beach or Laguna Beach is not really necessarily what we need. And this is like, because vacancy rates are significantly high in these places, arguably sort of catered and really focused efforts for production of housing at deeply affordable levels, it's what's important, right? So we see and we know that cities like Huntington Beach, but many others also are very frequently in the news, always engaged in conflict with the state. But there's one particular case that I would argue there was not a lot of media attention around it, and I think it's a really notable one. One that I'm not super proud our city, for instance, Irvine, was involved in, right? So because of that sharp increase in housing allocations to wealthier cities and many Orange County cities, there was a very contentious appeals process in 2020 and 2021, many cities trying to ask for reduced numbers, but a historical appeal was brought by 4 OC cities: Irvine, Newport Beach, Yorba Linda, fairly wealthy cities. Garden Grove would be the only exception, to not only ask for lower allocations for themselves, but they were also asking for higher allocations for Santana, right? One of the densest, lowest income cities in OC, 77% Latinx. And Garden Grove was the only city that was really arguing that the way in which the RENA methodology for SCAD was being implemented was leaving out some lower income cities like themselves from being classified as disadvantaged communities, right? And so to a degree, of course, I mean, we all carry our biases. I would give a little bit more credit to this particular appeal as opposed to the other appeals that were deeming unfair their higher housing numbers without really reflecting on how Santana has not only been a city that has produced a lot of low-income housing, but has really engaged in many other strategies to try to address their very pressing housing needs. And so, like, I'd much rather have questions from the audience. So I'll try to not dwell too much in how contentious this process was. I will just say that Orange County elected officials have generally been very much engaged in these regional and state level processes. And so, for instance, the RENA Appeals Board was chaired by an OC elected member. And so historically, they really have been able, like these more conservative and wealthy cities, to influence a lot of higher level decision making. However, this time around, because of fair housing legislation that was passed at the state level, and a little bit with the participation and the counterbalance of Inland Empire representatives, these motions, even though they really were very lengthy and contentious, they weren't successful, right? And so at the end of the day, even though these and many other cities are still really engaged in very relentless battles against the state to try to appeal and sort of counter these affordable housing development efforts, I would argue that they're increasingly unsuccessful, right? And so on the flip side, as I was mentioning towards the beginning of the presentation, I would argue that there's some interesting organizing and policy change going on at the same time that there's this level of contention, right? So we know that OC, especially perhaps Northern OC, but OC in general, has become more and more diverse. And so many of these different racial and ethnic groups that in the past have been able to coalesce against, for instance, anti-immigrant policies at the local level are now coalescing around affordable housing pressures and needs, right? And so on this front, Santana was the first OC city to enact just cause eviction and rent control ordinances, which are very contentious in OC and arguably even beyond. But then they've also been followed by a couple of other cities in Orange County, like Costa Mesa and Buena Park, along many other strategies that were previously unthought of in OC, right? We can think of inclusionary zoning, banning short-term rentals. There's a ton of things that, as we speak, really are happening and being implemented at the city council level. So I think the primary takeaways that I would want to leave you with before opening it to further discussion, it's to really rethink what are our societal and like broad societal needs. And I think housing, as Dean Gould previously underscored, housing it's really top of the list for many of us at this point, and that localized or privatized interests are not what really should be driving our policy and our democratic outcomes, right? In the past, I do think that different level of influence of different jurisdictions was skewing policy priorities at a very significant way, or in a very significant way. But that sort of reactionary housing politics, I do, or I would argue, are weakening in the California context. So I'll leave it at that, and happy to continue that conversation.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate your insights. Yeah, it's a unique space that a space and time that we're sitting in. I think as the cost of housing has continued to rise, we have seen it affect, particularly the middle class, which then I think raised it up as an issue, not just affecting low income and communities of color, and it's definitely put pressure on the state to take action. I'd like to open it up for questions. If anyone has questions, you're welcome to put them in the chat if you'd like them to be moderated, or if you'd like, I think there's not enough of us to really, excuse me. You're welcome to come off mute and share your questions if you have any that way. We had an interesting feedback about South Orange County, which I thought was interesting, about Rancho Santa Margarita, Aliso Viejo, and parts of Ladera are approved and initially approved and developed under the basis of providing lower cost homes in their time by increasing density in this area. And I would argue that that's true. We have seen, especially in some of the newer Rancho Mission Viejo, in that development, which is South County, they have a diverse array of home sales. They have housing that is priced, I think, for an 80 to 120 median income household. I would definitely say that that's it wasn't, I don't think, the way they were building perhaps in the 90s or the 2000s, but now that the issue of affordability has become so pressing, I think that more median income, attainable homes are being incorporated in South County. But as far as the question of, can we redevelop, right? I call it retroactive density. That's the term I've decided to coin, around where we take, perhaps large dilapidated shopping centers, right? Like the Related Bristol project, or the OC Vibe project. And we're trying to, retroactively impose density on what was an auto-oriented project. I think there's great opportunity there to integrate affordable housing and denser housing and more affordable and attainable types of housing in existing communities. And that's really where, we hit the NIMBYism is when we want to talk about in existing communities, not just adding housing or affordable housing or denser housing to the newly developed, new development in South County. But how do we integrate this? How do we make what was a suburban low density community? How do we re-envision that to create urban walkable spaces that integrate attainable and affordable housing in them? Anyway, that's my soapbox. So if I can have the minute of my own webinar. But yeah, I'd like to welcome any questions that anyone has for either the professor or the dean. Please come off mute if that's something.
Maybe in the meantime, I can offer a couple of just quick thoughts on the previous comments. I mean, when showing sort of like trends and maps, of course, I was like going through things fairly quickly and showing trends, right? Not sort of carefully going city by city. So definitely there's some exceptions. Like we can think about Villa Park in North OC or Jorbalinda in North OC as fairly exclusionary cities too, right? Villa Park has been a city that has only allowed housing, not only single family homes, but single family homes on half-acre lots. So yeah, there's definitely distinctions and a need to sort of like really carefully see how different cities are acting. And yeah, you're Jeffrey Harlan, it's completely right. Costa Mesa and only has just cause evictions, not rent control.
Interesting.
Right.
I mean,
So, hi, this is Chad Brown speaking, and I had the comment about the South Orange County area because I have, not only did I study and graduate from social ecology a long time ago, 1990. So it's great to hear the anteaters out there spewing the information and so forth. But I also worked for the city of Laguna Niguel right out of university and the county of Orange until 2004 in their planning departments. So not only I had a hand in a I guess a front row seat to what the cities of Rancho Santa Margarita, Aliso Viejo, Ladera Ranch, the Rancho Mission Viejo current development that's going on, and some of the struggles that they have that are tied to the infrastructure, habitat protections, and others that are limiting their ability to increase density and create a more affordable aspect to them. But the side of what's going on with housing is those areas that you, Professor Reyes, those areas that you pointed out, particularly in South Orange County, have higher values because of the scarcity of resource, which is land. I now work for a private home builder and have been developing homes in Garden Grove, in Anaheim, in Costa Mesa for a number of years. And the aspect of land values is where this comes to be, is the driving force behind the cost of housing. I think, in one of my thoughts as we were talking, one of the things that I think where this really started to jump forward is in the loss of the redevelopment agencies that the cities once had the ability to control land and then control the sale of that land for policy purposes, if that be the case. And when you talk about Villa Park and places like that, that was an area that incorporated it into a city for its local control to maintain its lifestyle. That was much the case with many of the South Orange County cities as well. The current council and most recent councils didn't create the 1 acre zoning. The 1 acre zoning homes created their own city to protect themselves. So that's a bit of the history of Orange County in a nutshell that happens kind of throughout. But going back to the affordability side of land is the biggest cost of housing. And when you've lost the public agency's ability to control land and the ability for them to implement their policies by being selective of and in control of who and what happens there from the get-go, I think is a real concern that seems to have been forgotten in a lot of ways from again, going back to the loss of the redevelopment agency. I needed to add that in because I am a home builder. I'm in the area. We've built many a project. We are a for sale builder, but we've built many a project with utilizing density bonus law. And with that, it's the benefits of parking. But every one of those affordable units that we have brought to the market in moderate rate, and thank goodness we are able to only need to provide them at moderate rate in our communities, is if the house is market rate selling for $700,000, and this is a 2-3 story townhome selling for $700,000 in Anaheim, the cost to build that house is about 500,000. Our maximum moderate level pricing for able to sell those homes, restricted for affordability, median income 80-20 or 80 to 120, is about $470,000. And with interest rates increasing the way they are, that number has shrunk even further because it's all based upon what somebody can pay as a mortgage. It's what 35% of their income can be devoted to a mortgage, and that includes HOA, utilities, and all the lending costs. So we as a builder are actually subsidizing. If that house cost us $580,000 to build and we can only sell it for $440,000, we're subsidizing $140,000 of our own dollars to provide that housing. And we don't get recognition or benefit other than maybe some slight reduction in parking or a setback reduction. So, and it's only 10%. So on a 60-unit project, there's 6 homes. That's not putting a dent in the homelessness aspect, but it does help from the affordability side. I just needed to step in and wanted to mention that, and happy to hear your response or anybody's response to some of that.
Yeah, there's no question that the issues that are facing the tax credit affordable housing done by like a Jamboree Housing or a National Community Renaissance Housing Project, it's a different animal, different pro forma than the 3-story townhome with tuck under parking, which I really believe is the first time home buyer opportunity in Orange County. I think that housing typology has the most potential to make homeownership a reality for the next generation of millennials and Gen Zers. At the same time, we know that housing exists on a continuum, and when we can move people up the ladder in terms of what they can afford and where they're living, it does take pressure off of people that are really experiencing rent burden. There's just fewer people to compete with, and when we build for the top of the market, it's a both and. I think we need the affordability and the increased subsidies and the assistance to help people remain in their homes at the same time that we continue building for the future of people who would are in a position to buy their first home or are looking to do that. Allison, I see your hand up. Please go ahead.
Thank you to the presenters. Those were great presentations. Let's lower my hand here. Yeah, Allison Henry. I actually work mainly in LA County, but Orange County is always on our radar because of the confluence, right? There's a lot of shared communities at the border of our counties. I want to thank both Dr. Reyes and Dr. Gould for your presentations. They were really interesting. My question is more of a statement, and I put it in the chat. I think if you were to start, it may not be true on this call. I don't know everyone's politics, but in our own polling on tenants' rights and housing advocacy, which is what I do, particularly for the San Gabriel Valley, if you ask people about policies like just cause eviction, rent control, which is basically limiting rent increases a year, you will find that would be interesting research for you to do in Orange County, because we have found support and increased support for those policies, not just for the tenants who might experience them firsthand, but I helped write the rent control law in Pasadena. I now sit on the Pasadena Rental Housing Board, and one of the most important nexuses we did was showing people what happens to your school district enrollment when housing is unaffordable and unattainable for families and staff. And so in that series of inquiries, you started to find support for policies that maybe in the past had been contentious. So I would really encourage both of you to pose those questions, particularly in an election year, because in small cities, it's been these supports that determine the outcome of city council for those that are engaged in those discussions in the city. I just want to thank both of you for a wonderful presentation, and I look forward to digging more into the data and the information. Thanks, Elizabeth, for putting this together.
Yeah, my pleasure. My pleasure. I know that those issues are contentious, and I know one of the things that I embrace wholeheartedly is the full breadth of political persuasions, right? I really think housing is it's not a partisan issue, in part because we all need a place to live. And also because I think we can say, you know, it doesn't, yeah, it doesn't have to be a partisan issue. And so what I would like to see is, particularly among elected officials, if I could hearken to the people that are considering running for office, it would be to make room, because we have projects that are waiting to be heard, right? We literally, in multiple places around Orange County, I get phone calls around, you know, a project that it's done its due diligence, it ought to be deemed complete by the city, and there's a political reason that they don't want to bring it forward, that they don't want to let it have its hearing, that they don't want it to see the light of day. We have a pipeline of developers who want to build, right? Nonprofit developers, for sale developers. We have a pipeline of projects that would come forward. We need elected officials to make room in their city for new housing. That I think is the one thing that we should all hopefully come away from this convening with, you know, in solid agreement, is that the message to the elected officials, the would-be aspiring elected officials for 2024, is make room, is to find places in your city that you can add capacity for new development, because it's so important, especially to, you know, keep the full breadth of our workforce that make our communities what they are, and also for the next generation, so that people who've grown up here are not displaced and don't have to go either to Texas or the Inland Empire. Again, sorry, my soapbox. Do we have any other questions, or anyone else want to unmute themselves? We have about 10 minutes left.
Elizabeth, so if I
Yeah.
may, I think I can add a couple of thoughts on, and I think they both respond a little bit, like a bit more to Allison's comment, but tangentially to Chad's as well. So one thing that I would argue, and there's tons of academic research and policy research backing this up, not only in California, but elsewhere in the US, it's that and this is going to be contentious and perhaps a little bit controversial, especially in Orange County and especially among the private sector. But the private sector production, it's not going to be enough to address our pressing housing needs, right? We know, and a little bit of the response from OC residents recognize that, right? Government and public policies are very important. And even policies like rent control that have been controversial in the past, because really old econometric studies argued that they limited construction, are being increasingly debunked, because the types of rent control policies, for instance, that are increasingly also very much supported by residents in North OC and increasingly elsewhere as well, are much less stringent than they were in the past, right? And so that's a lot of what, for instance, advocates in Costa Mesa and elsewhere have been arguing, right? With everything from inclusionary zoning to eviction protections, etc. Like these policies are implemented and production continues, right? However, the level of profit, and let's recognize that the bulk of affordable housing production in California, it's for profit. So, and to me, that's a little bit of an oxymoron, right? Like we cannot sort of like have our cake and eat it too, make a product profitable and more affordable at the same time. And so that's a little bit of the root cause of the issues. And I know not everyone, even in this room, will agree with me, but that's something that I would push for, because there's a lot of research backing that up.
Yeah, I think that the root cause is the fact that we want housing to be, you know, affordable, attainable, and, you know, the everyone's quote unquote savings account, at least in the middle class, and yet we want it, you know, and we want prices to rise, but yet we want it to be affordable. And I think, you know, I'm of the mind that, you know, I agree with you. I don't think that we can just rely on the private sector to build our way out of this problem. It's definitely a both and. We need housing subsidy, especially for people at the extremely low and very low income levels, because those are people for whom the market not going to serve. And so the importance of the both and, I think, is what I want to emphasize. But I think, you know, to Chad's point, you know, it's those 3-story townhomes with tuck under parking that are the first rung of the ladder of homeownership for that dual income young family that grew up, you know, in Orange County and wants to stay here. And so making room for that type of housing over the objection, you know, of the people in the single family homes who don't want people looking in their backyard or have some other ridiculous reason, as though a new homeowner has nothing better to do than to sit there with their binoculars, standing on their chair and, you know, peering down into your backyard. I mean, sometimes the things that folks are objecting to stand in the way of new housing opportunity is truly ridiculous. It's absolutely truly ridiculous. And so keeping the focus on making room for new development and on the future that we are trying to house, right? I mean, I think we've all seen places in Orange County where the schools are, you know, more than 50% of the young people, young students that are there are transferring in from other parts of the city, more affordable parts of the city, because the neighborhood where the school is mostly older, whiter, wealthier homeowners who are grandparents, and their grandchildren are in Colorado or in Arizona or in Texas. And so, you know, that trend of, you know, can that house have an ADU, right? Is there a way to reposition our neighborhoods to make room for that next generation, which I think is like so important. All right, well, we're coming up on the end. Any last minute thoughts from either of our panelists? Thank you so much again for participating in this. And I know these are big problems, and you know, we may not all agree on every point, but hopefully we can come away agreeing that we want our elected officials in 2024, the folks running for office and the folks seeking re-election, to not back away from this issue, to really embrace it as an opportunity to create more equitable communities and communities with more capacity for housing.
Appreciate the opportunity to be here and to share the poll results. I think what they show, it's not just we who think this. Orange County residents very much consider this to be a top issue and a problem they want to see elected officials address.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, the only additional thing that I would add, it's also taking and following a little bit on your last thoughts, thinking of a place like Irvine, which has built a ton of housing, which is great, but arguably not at levels of affordability that are needed, right? So or I would also advocate for our efforts, policy efforts, to go to very low income and low income housing in particular.
I definitely see the need every day. So, all right. Well, thank you everyone for tuning in. I really appreciate you giving us your lunch hour to have this important conversation. And yeah, really thank you for joining. And when you're talking to your neighbors and your friends about who's running, the question we want you to ask is, what's your position on housing? How are we going to make room for more affordable housing and attainable housing in Orange County? So thank you everyone very much.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Take care.